Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a great day at 2:22 on a Monday afternoon. Uh, Welcome to week 4 of our modern conflicts class. I hope you guys had a great time talking about the Yemen Civil War last class. And today we are ready to talk about probably the most controversial of all the current wars, and that is the war between Israel and Hamas. Now, of course, a lot of people have very different and differing opinions about this. I have my own opinions, but that's not my job to tell you that. Um, I'm going to be giving you the basic rundown of everything that's led up to this point and everything that's gone on since October 7th, 2023, last year. But before we do, I want to remind you guys. I thought I was about to say, uh, click the bell and subscribe, but no. But anyway, I want to remind you guys of these two quotes I showed you guys last class. First one, welcome to the Middle East where there are no good solutions, only problems, by my good friend Ben Shapiro. At least I wish we were friends. And then there are two kinds of people in the Middle East, those who bomb civilians and those who support the ones bombing civilians, by a very handsome young man. He's a great guy. But anyway, um, yeah, let's dive right into it. Um, so Israel right here, you can see this map. The main controversy that has been going on since the creation of the Jewish state in the 1940s has been basically these three areas, basically the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. Now, let me give you a quick history. So, when Israel was first created right after World War II, there was a lot of displeasure, to say the least, among a bunch of other Arab countries. Uh, Specifically, I'll talk about Jordan, Egypt, and Syria, Lebanon, and a bunch of others, a little bit more. But this most of the history is between Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. Now, when Jew State was first created, the British were occupying it to keep everything safe, but then they decided to pull out, and then once they did, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria all decided to invade, and so Egypt took control of the Gaza Strip, Jordan took control of the West Bank area here, and then Syria took control of the Golan Heights. Eventually, that war ended, but those territorial claims remained the same. Let's see. Later, well, not very later, there's another war called the 6 Day War, I believe. Let me see. The 6 Day War, where Egypt was amassing a bunch of troops on their border with Israel, and as we saw with Ukraine in what was it, 2022, that's not a good sign. So Israel just decided to preemptive strike and go straight into Egypt. They captured all of the Sinai Peninsula all the way up to the Suez Canal. Jordan, Syria, and Iraq all joined in, but they didn't do much. So uh, let's see. Israel took control of the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, and the West Bank. Did they take control of the Golan Heights? We're just going to say they did. They eventually did in one of their wars. I'm not sure which one it was, and that's my bad. But they took control of a bunch of that area that was occupied by these other countries. Then there were other wars, such as the Yom Kippur War, which, remind me what the Yom Kippur War was. Well, yeah, there was a bunch of wars between Israel and a bunch of their neighbors. Eventually, Israel decided to give the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt, and that was in about the 1970s. Around then, Egypt decided to normalize, well, quote unquote, normalize their relations with Israel, and they actually decided to recognize Israel as a state because they hadn't up to that point in protest of their existence. So they just decided, like, Israel's not a thing. Eventually, Jordan would also recognize them, and a bunch of other places would soon follow. In 2020, uh, countries such as Morocco, Sudan, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates all signed the Abraham Accords that recognized Israel's existence, which brought a ton of peace to the area. Go Donald Trump, by the way. But a few other countries still remain that did not recognize them. For instance, Lebanon, Syria, and most importantly, Iran. Those are the three mainly we'll talk about today. So while Israel's big wars with their neighbors have sort of ceased, that does not mean that there hasn't been a bunch of stuff going on. A bunch of terrorist attacks by this group called Hamas in Palestine. Now, Hamas, they're not, well, I don't know everything about Hamas, but they're not technically the government, but they kind of operate as the de facto government. The same with a group known as Hezbollah that is stationed in Lebanon. What the heck? Lebanon. They're they're both Iranian proxies, and they both have pretty much taken over the government, and they kind of make their own decisions. Uh, what's the word? Independently from the actual government, so they're just their own thing. Um, Eventually, during their wars with their neighbors, Israel took back control of the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and they took the Golan Heights, although not very many people recognize Israel's claim on the Golan Heights, but they still occupy it. Um, but the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are technically part of Palestine, so Israel's not governing over them, quote unquote. There's a lot of stuff going on there, which I'm not going to get into. But even when Israel is at peace with their neighbors like Jordan and Egypt, there's still been a lot of terrorism going on there with Hamas and Hezbollah. There have been, I think Israel's invaded Lebanon to try and destroy Hezbollah multiple times over the past few decades. And yeah, stuff has just kept going on until stuff got really bad on October 7th of last year, 2023, when uh, Hamas in Gaza, they decided to launch a surprise raid into Israel. They used a bunch of stuff. They used paragliders. People paraglided into Israel over the border wall. Sometimes they just decided to nope the border wall and just use bulldozers and bowled them over. And so a bunch of uh, Hamas fighters, they stormed into Israel, taking over towns and murdering a bunch of people. I think the total death count on October 7th was over 1,000 people, most of which were civilians. The most notorious story is a concert in a town that I don't remember the name of, but I think it was about 300 people were killed at a concert there, most of them young people, and there was quite a few people who were taken as hostages back into Gaza. Now, Israel has one of the best militaries in the world. I don't have the list here, but they're very high up. The IDF, the Israel Defense Force, I guess they should have had previous knowledge about this, but I guess it was such a great secret that Hamas kept so that they were totally surprised. They also did it on the Sabbath, which is not cool. But once it did happen, Israel decided to put that massive military into effect, and they just pushed Hamas back over the border into Gaza. Now, if you think they were going to stop there, you'd be gravely mistaken. Now, a lot of people did want them to stop right there, especially a lot of places like Iran and whatnot. But they decided we have to end this once and for all. We have to destroy Hamas. So what they did was that they were going to start off in the north of the country. They told all the people in Gaza's largest city, Gaza City. I think that's the largest city. I assume so. They told them all to flee below a line that they made about right here. They told everyone in here has to flee south, okay, because we're going to absolutely level all of this. And so they did that. A lot of people got angry, like, you can't do that. You can't tell them to leave. But Israel was like, we can, and we're going to. So they decided to storm into Gaza. They took over Gaza City within a few days or a few weeks. It doesn't matter. But there was a lot of alleged uh, human rights abuses. There was a lot of missiles being fired on both sides. Uh, a lot of buildings being leveled. One story in particular is of a hospital that was hit by a missile, and hundreds of people died. And each side, Hamas and Israel, blamed each other. Um, the real deal with that is that Hamas has been accused multiple times, and I think this is true, that their they make their operations bases inside of hospitals because they think, well, hey, I'm here in a hospital, so you can't shoot me with a missile because that would be wrong. You know what I'm saying? Haha. But Israel's like, you know what? If you're gonna hide in a hospital, then that's fine. Go ahead. And so they just decide to shoot him anyway. And then a lot of casualties ensue, which is not ideal for both sides. Okay? But that's just what's going on. Now, there's a lot of people who, at this point, there's a lot of people who are saying, "Oh, Israel's doing this. Israel's doing this. They're monsters. Oh, it's a genocide. It's a genocide." As I told you guys on the blog, I told you guys to look up the definition of genocide. I'll let you decide what that means. But one of the most prominent and frankly hilarious group is the liberal betas that are calling on this whatever genocide on Palestinians. We stand with Palestine, whatever. But what they don't realize is what they're actually standing with. What they don't understand what Palestine and Hamas stand for. They're always on these campuses chanting stuff like "to the river, to the sea," Intifada, whatever. But they don't realize that "to the river, to the sea" basically just means, well, kill the Jews. Uh, they to the river, the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea basically just means we want to kill all the Jews there. Intifada pretty much literally means kill the Jews. And then here, kill the Jews? Well, that just means kill the Jews. So basically, everything that these liberal beta protesters are saying is just boiled down to kill the Jews. Now, they might know that or they might not. Maybe they're just anti-Semitists. But regardless, there have been a lot of accusations on both sides of genocide, whatnot, a lot on Israel's side. But regardless of these accusations, Israel, they decided to keep on going. They went south past this line that they told everyone to flee down to, and they just kept telling them, "Go, keep going south, keep going south. We don't want to hurt you, but if you don't, we're gonna have to." They took another city called Khan Yunis, and eventually by I don't know, December, January, March, something like that, they were poised to take the city of Rafah. Now, at this point, there had been, I think, about a month after October 7th, there was a ceasefire brokered between Hamas and Israel by our good friends in Qatar. Now, Qatar is an interesting situation because while, yes, they're trying to host peace talks between the Israel and Hamas, they're also a lot of Hamas leadership lives in Qatar. So I don't really know where they stand on it. They're probably just a tiny bit pro Hamas, but I'll let whoever picks Qatar decide what they decide to do with that information. But anyway, that ceasefire didn't last long. Both sides accused each other of breaking it, but regardless, the fighting continued. And eventually, Israel was in full control of the Gaza Strip. And there had been lots of casualties, lots of casualties. I'll get into that in a little bit. But recently, just this year, there were two major updates. Well, actually, no, three. So one was Hezbollah, one was Iran, and one was Syria. I'll start with Hezbollah. So You remember I said Hezbollah is a militant group stationed in Lebanon. So Hezbollah was really mad about what uh, Israel was doing in the Gaza Strip. So they decided, you know what, we're just going to harass Israel. So they start off with just rockets, launching tons and tons of rockets into Israel. I don't know if they actually did a ground invasion or not, but something sparked Israel, and they decided, you know what, we're done with you guys, and they decided to invade Lebanon too. Now everyone was mad about that too because they're mad about everything Israel does, and but regardless, Israel was fighting in Lebanon with Hezbollah for a few months. Hezbollah, they continued to fight, and though a lot of people were saying we need a ceasefire, we need a ceasefire. Mainly the liberal betas who I just laugh at all the time. It's just they're just so hilarious. But anyway, a lot of people calling for a ceasefire, but Hezbollah is like, no, we're not doing a ceasefire until Israel stops their stuff in the Gaza Strip and they pull out. About a month ago, they got a ceasefire between the two of them, so obviously that was a lie. But anyway, Israel is going to pull out of Lebanon, and Hezbollah is going to pull out of the south of Lebanon as well. And then the government of Lebanon is just going to occupy all of that. Next is Iran. Now, let's see. Now, Iran has this thing going on where they like to support a bunch of proxy states. So, mainly, it's in their places like the Houthis in Yemen that we talked about last week. Obviously, Hamas in Palestine, Hezbollah in Lebanon, places like Assad's Syria Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria, and also places like Iraq. So they have this nice little crescent going on here. Now, a lot of this stuff going on in Palestine and Lebanon was getting Iran real ticked. So they decided, you know what, Israel, you can't do this. We're going to launch some rockets at Israel directly, not using our proxies, not anybody else. They're our own rockets that are launched from Iran to Israel. So most of them were intercepted. I think there might have been a few of them that landed, but nothing major. Israel decided, you know what, you want to play that game? I'm going to launch rockets at you. And then I think something about them hitting a nuclear research facility or something like that happened. But now the two are launching rockets at each other, and that could blow into an entire war that we won't get into this week, but we might get into next week. We'll see. And then the third major update is in Syria. Now, I'm hoping to talk more about this in our next class, but here's the rundown on what happened in Syria. So Syria was embroiled in a decades-long civil war. The civil war went on since 2011, I believe. Or was it 14? I think it was 14. Syria started in 14. It was between Bashar al-Assad's regime, which was propped up by Iran, Russia, and Hezbollah, against rebels, which were propped up by Turkey and the United States. Now, the government forces and the rebels, they were fighting for a long time, and there was a stalemate going on for quite a few years. But recently, with Iran being focused in Syria, Lebanon being Iran being focused in Israel, Lebanon being dismantled by Israel. Oh wait, sorry, I forgot to show you guys this meme of what happened when Hezbollah decided to go at it with Israel. It's kind of like this, if you can imagine what's going on here. But anyway, so here we are. So Lebanon is tied up in Israel, Iran is tied up in Israel, and Russia, of course, is tied up in Ukraine. That leaves Syria vulnerable because they're not being held up by all of their supporters. So these rebels, which were funded and supported by Turkey, they started from their little chunk in the northwest, and they stormed all the way through Syria to the capital in Damascus, forcing Bashar al-Assad, the president, to flee to Moscow. And now this group called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, otherwise known as HTS, is now in charge of Syria. Side note, these guys have ties to Al Qaeda and ISIS, which is probably not a great thing for Israel, which led them to uh, launch a little invasion into Syria to secure a little bit more of a buffer zone between them and the Golan Heights. They've also launched bombing raids on chemical weapon depots, and they've launched invasions to try and dismantle Syria's ability to launch chemical weapons at Israel from their positions in Syria, because you really don't want that. You really don't want Al Qaeda affiliates in possession of chemical weapons. Um, let's see, is there anything else I'm missing about this? So, really, Israel is in control of all of the Gaza Strip for the most part. There have been a lot of stuff going on in the West Bank, with a lot of violence going on between the Israelis and the Palestinians there. There was that invasion into Lebanon, which Israel just absolutely crushed Hezbollah. And then this most recent invasion into Syria to gain a little bit more of a buffer zone between them and Al Qaeda affiliates. Now I want to talk about let's see. Oh, how'd that get in there? Anyway, now I want to talk a bit more about the humanitarian side of this. So, as I said earlier, both sides have been accused of genocide and uh, targeting civilians on both sides. Of course, that's true to some extent. But anyway, here are all of the uh, casualty numbers. So, as I said earlier, over 1,000 people were killed. The Hamas attack, most of them civilians, and a few children. Now, during the invasion of the Gaza Strip, there's been tons of casualties, unfortunate casualties. I think most of them have been civilians, of course. Sorry, my audio got disconnected again. But anyway, where was I? Right, so there have been a lot of casualties in the Israeli invasion of Palestine and the Gaza Strip. Most of them have been civilians, unfortunately, but the Gaza Authority, I think it's either Gaza or Lebanon, they don't differentiate between whether it's civilians being killed or Hamas fighters being killed, which is not very helpful of them. And then there have been people dying with attacks from Israelis and Palestinians in the West Bank. Now, all of this stuff going on there has led the United Nations to declare Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, this lovely fellow right here, as a war criminal, and they want to bring him in for trial for war crimes and whatnot. He's only the third person who has been convicted of war crimes as sitting head of their state. The other two have been Omar al-Bashir of Sudan, former leader there. He's now rotting in a Sudanese jail. And, of course, Vladimir Putin of Russia. I'm sure you all know him. And Benjamin Netanyahu is only the third guy to have done that. So I guess you gotta be known for something, I guess. But if I'm not mistaken, I think that's basically everything that I need to tell you guys about. Just yeah. Reminder, here's all the countries that you can pick from. I did probably tell you a bit of the why of what's going on, but for the rest of it, I want you guys to figure that out. So have fun studying and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks, guys.